Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into a really interesting company, one that kind of sits right at the crossroads of everyday wellness, and some pretty advanced biotech. We're talking about Niagen Bioscience Inc.
Yeah.
So let's unpack this a bit. Our goal today is really to give you a full picture of Niagen Bioscience, especially looking at their unique dual strategy. You've got this consumer product business that's actually making money, cash flowing, and it's using that to fund what's usually a very high-risk, high-reward pharmaceutical pipeline. It's quite a setup, and we want to explore how they're doing it and what it means if you're curious about this as maybe an investment vehicle.
Yeah, what's really fascinating here, I think, isn't just that they have financial stability, which is rare enough in biotech. It's the strategic advantage this gives them. Imagine a biotech that can actually, weather the storms of drug development, the setbacks, the huge capital needs, because it's funded by this consumer side. That kind of freedom is, well, it's almost unheard of in this sector.
That stability is definitely a key point. And for Niagen Bioscience, getting to that stability and this sort of new vision really started with a big move. Their recent rebrand. You might have known them as Chromadex Corp before. But then, March 19, 2025, they became Niagen Bioscience Inc. And that wasn't just like a name change for the sake of it, was it? What was the real strategy there?
No, not at all. It was a very calculated strategic move. The idea was to get the company's public identity fully aligned with its main patented asset, which is Niagen, their nicotinamide riboside. It signals a really deep commitment to the pharmaceutical side of things. Their CEO, Rob Fried, he basically said Niagen Bioscience is at its core an NAD company. So the aim is to shift how investors see them, not just a supplement company, but a bioscience platform company. And that, crucially, usually commands higher valuations in the market.
Right, makes sense. Repositioning. And who's steering the ship here?
Yeah.
The CEO, Rob Fried, he's got a bit of an unusual background for biotech, right? An Academy Award, Emmy-winning producer. How does that kind of perspective play into running a science-heavy company?
Yeah, it's definitely not the typical route. His commercial skills are pretty clear from the success of the Tru Niagen brand. But importantly, the scientific foundation is very strong too. You've got their chief scientific advisor, Dr. Charles Brenner. He's the one who made the key discovery about NR being an NAD plus precursor. And then there's this program called CRIP, the Chromadex External Research Program. It's actually quite clever. Niagen Bioscience gives its patented Niagen to over 300 research places worldwide. This generates a ton of research, like over 400 published papers. It lets them do early R&D very capital efficiently and helps them decide which clinical trials to pursue internally. It's a pretty unique R&D engine.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting for me. How does a company mostly known for, supplements off the shelf manage to actually fund a serious biotech pipeline? Clinical trials aren't cheap.
Exactly. And that's where their philosophy, this idea of a biotech acting as a consumer product company, really comes into play. The Tru Niagen business, it's high margin, it generates positive cash flow, and that cash acts as a non-dilutive funding source for the pharma side, meaning they don't have to constantly sell stock to raise money for R&D. And the numbers back it up. Q1 2025, they reported $5.1 million in net income, $7.9 million positive operating cash flow, and they had $55.6 million in cash. And this is key, zero debt. Absolutely none.
Wow, zero debt.
Zero debt. You compare that to so many biotechs that burn through cash and rely totally on funding rounds. Like, remember Unity Biotechnology? They didn't have that revenue stream and they struggled. This financial strength gives Niagen Bioscience huge flexibility. It really de-risks things, from an investor standpoint.
That financial model is definitely a standout feature. Okay, let's get into the science itself. The core of all this is NAD++. Maybe for listeners who aren't deep into biology, can you just break down what NAD+ is and why it's so crucial?
Sure. NAD plus Turin, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. It's fundamental. It's a coenzyme in literally every living cell. Think of it like vital fuel for your cellular machinery. It's involved in hundreds of processes, especially energy production in the mitochondria. It also works with key enzymes like sirtuins, those regulate aging and metabolism, and PARPs, which are involved in DNA repair. Now, the critical thing is our NAD plus levels naturally go down as we get older or when our bodies are under stress. And this decline, it's linked to a lot of the functional decline we see with aging, maybe even susceptibility to certain diseases. But here's the catch. You can't just take an NAD plus pill or infusion and expect it to work perfectly. The molecule itself, it's too big in charge to get into cells easily. That's where nicotinamide riboside, or NR, comes in. Dr. Brenner's big discovery was that NR is this unique precursor, a form of vitamin B3, that gets inside cells efficiently and then converts into NAD+ using something called the salvage pathway. So it's a much better way to boost those internal NAD+ levels.
Okay, so NR is the vehicle, and Niagen Bioscience has a couple of different products using it. Can you explain the difference between Tru Niagen and this Niagen Plus?
Right, they have a two-pronged approach. Tru Niagen is the main consumer supplement, the oral capsules. Comes in different doses, 150 milligrams, 300 milligrams, even 1,000 milligram pro version. And they've got clinical studies showing it boosts blood NAD+ levels pretty significantly, like 40-50% increase with the 300 milligram dose, up to 150% with 1,000 milligram. That's aimed at general wellness, healthy aging, that kind of thing. Then you have Niagen Plus. This is different. It's IV and injectable formulations. It's positioned as premium, pharmaceutical grade, and it's prescription only. The big selling point, based on a pilot study they did, is that it's much better tolerated than getting a direct NAD plus IV. People often get headaches or feel nauseous with direct NAD plus IV, but apparently not with Niagen Plus. Plus, the infusion time is way shorter, like 75% shorter, and it achieves even higher NAD plus levels in the blood. So Tru Niagen targets the mass market. Niagen Plus goes after high-end clinics, medical use, even the biohacking crowd. And having that pharmaceutical grade product kind of elevates the scientific image of the whole Niagen ingredient.
So, the NAD plus space feels like it's getting crowded. Lots of supplements claiming to boost NAD plus 1. What makes Niagen's NR really stand out compared to, say, other precursors like NMN, or just taking NAD plus directly?
Well, like we just said, direct NAD plus has bioavailability issues and potential side effects. NR gets around that. Now, compared to other vitamin B3 precursors like nicotinamide, often called NM, is also effective, no doubt. But Niagen Bioscience's real competitive edge with NR isn't just the molecule itself, that's their intellectual property. Their IP portfolio is massive, over 50 patents, and critically, they include composition of matter patents for different forms of NR. That's like the strongest type of patent protection you can get. It basically gives them a legal monopoly on their specific, well-studied molecule. Competitors can't just copy it. They have to use something else, maybe NMN, whose regulatory status is a bit fuzzy now, or other forms of NR that don't have the same level of clinical validation. That IP fortress is their main defense.
That IP moat sounds crucial for the long run. Are they looking at other ways to deliver NR, or maybe other applications, like skincare maybe? Seems like NAD plus could be relevant there too.
Skincare definitely makes sense scientifically. NAD plus declines in skin with age, and you already see other B vitamins like niacinamide in cosmetics. And yes, some clinics using Niagen Plus do mention skin benefits from the oral Tru Niagen too. But while the company sort of acknowledges skincare potential, their main focus, where they're putting their R&D money and effort, is clearly on boosting NAD plus systemically throughout the body with the oral and IV products. Skincare seems more like something they might license out down the road, let someone else run with it, rather than develop it internally right now. They're focusing their shots.
Okay, so we've established this solid base. But now let's shift gears to where the really big transformative potential might be, the clinical pipeline. This isn't just a side project. It seems central to their future story. How are they picking their targets here, given all that research from SERP?
Yeah, it's definitely the potential growth engine. They use what you could call an intelligent shots on goal strategy. They have all this data coming in from the SERP program, remember, 35 plus human studies, over 400 papers. They look for areas where NAD plus metabolism seems clearly involved and where there's a real need for better treatments. That helps them decide where to place their bigger bets, where to spend the serious money on formal clinical trials.
So what are those key areas? It looks like neurodegenerative and rare diseases are core to their pharma strategy. Let's start with Parkinson's disease. What's the latest there?
Yeah. Parkinson's is definitely the lead program right now. They're running the NOPARK trial. It's a big one, phase 3, 400 patients, testing 1,000 milligram daily dose of NR for a year. It's fully enrolled now, which is great news, and they're expecting top-line results in early 2025. This is, without question, the biggest near-term catalyst for the company. There was an earlier trial, NR Safe, which used an even higher dose, 3,000 milligrams a day. It showed NR was safe, well-tolerated at that dose, and actually had a mild but statistically significant clinical improvement. So if NOPARK confirms that benefit in a larger trial, well, that would be huge. Game-changing, potentially.
And what about those rare genetic diseases? Werner syndrome, ataxia-telangiectasia, or AT? Targeting those seems like a smart move, going after smaller, defined patient groups.
It really is a smart strategy. These are conditions sometimes called progeroid syndromes, genetic disorders that mimic accelerated aging. And there's evidence suggesting NAD plus depletion plays a role. In Werner syndrome, a study showed NR improved things like arterial stiffness, skin ulcers. For ataxia telangiectasia, which is a really devastating childhood neurodegenerative disease, a trial showed NR was safe and seemed to slow down the disease progression, improve motor coordination. And here's the key. Niagen Bioscience got orphan drug designation and rare pediatric disease designation from the FDA for NR and AT. That's a big deal. It means a potentially faster, cheaper path to approval.
Interesting. Beyond neuro, they're also looking at things like post-viral conditions, specifically long COVID. The science makes sense, but I've heard some noise about delays with the Boston long COVID trial data. Is that something investors should be worried about? What's going on there?
You're right to flag that. The rationale for long COVID is strong. We know the SARS-CoV-2 virus can mess with NAD+ levels, leading to energy problems, mitochondrial issues, which could explain fatigue, brain fog. So NR seems like a logical approach. However, you're also right about the trial data. There's definitely been a significant delay in reporting results from that Boston long COVID trial. The results posting to clinicaltrials.gov was quite late, and as of, mid-2025, there's still no public data release. That lack of transparency absolutely creates uncertainty, and it's a valid concern for investors, something people are watching very closely.
Okay. And then there's oncology, cellular therapy, maybe the most futuristic sounding application, especially with CAR T therapy. How does NAD plus fit in there? That sounds potentially massive.
It really is. This could be transformative. There was a major paper in Nature Cancer just back in May 2025. It showed that CAR T-cell therapy, this really powerful cutting-edge cancer treatment, doesn't work as well in older patients. Why? Because their NAD+ levels are lower due to age. But here's the kicker. The study found that boosting NAD+ with compounds like NR actually rejuvenated those aging CAR T cells, making them better at fighting tumors again. So think about it. NR isn't the cancer drug itself, but it could be a crucial enabler for these multi-billion-dollar CAR T therapies, making them work better in more patients. The potential for high-value partnerships or licensing deals there is enormous. It's a huge potential value driver.
We've hit a lot of positives, but let's be balanced. What about some criticisms or challenges in their trial data? Besides the long COVID delay, wasn't there a trial for chemotherapy-induced neuropathy, CIPN, that got stopped early because of tolerability issues? How does that square with the Parkinson's trial, where a much higher dose was fine? That seems contradictory.
Yeah, that CIPN trial result is definitely a point to consider, a sort of bearish data point. The official reason given was that dose escalation to 1,000 milligrams a day didn't happen because doctors felt patients weren't tolerating the 300 milligram dose well. Now, that does seem to clash directly with the Parkinson's trial where 3,000 milligram was tolerated. What it probably highlights is that tolerability can really depend on the patient population. People getting chemo are often very frail. They have lots of other health issues. Their symptoms might be complex. Maybe their systems are just more sensitive or side effects get confused. So it doesn't necessarily mean NR is unsafe overall, but it suggests that developing it for really sick or heavily medicated groups might be trickier, might need different dosing strategies. It's something to be aware of.
So with all these potential treatments, some promising, some facing hurdles, how do they actually plan to get these things approved and out to patients? What's the FDA strategy look like?
Well, a key part of their strategy is targeting those rare diseases first, like AT, because that opens up special FDA programs. We mentioned orphan drug designation for AT. That gives them things like 7 years of market exclusivity after approval, tax credits on R&D costs, and they don't have to pay the huge FDA application fee that alone saves millions. They might also be able to use the accelerated approval pathway. That means potentially getting approval faster based on hitting certain surrogate endpoints, maybe changes in NAD+ levels or specific motor scores, as long as they promise to do follow-up studies after approval to confirm the benefit. It can really speed things up and save a lot of money getting these drugs to patients who need them.
And this must bring up that tricky issue for them. The difference between claims you can make for a supplement versus a drug. How do they manage that? It seems like a fine line to walk.
It's an absolutely critical line, and they have to be incredibly careful. It's fundamental to their whole dual business. For supplements like Tru Niagen, they can make structure function claims, things like supports cellular energy or promotes healthy aging. They have to notify the FDA and put a disclaimer on the bottle, but they cannot make disease claims like treats Parkinson's or improves long COVID symptoms. Those kinds of claims are only allowed for FDA-approved drugs. If they crossed that line, used Parkinson's trial data to market Tru Niagen for Parkinson's, the FDA would come down hard. It would be illegal drug marketing. So maintaining that strict regulatory firewall is absolutely essential.
Okay, so on the commercial side, how do the products actually get out there? What are the sales channels?
For Tru Niagen, the consumer product, it's pretty standard. Their own website, Amazon, and then major retailers like Vitamin Shoppe, Sprouts, even Walmart now. But the really dynamic part, the bit that's growing incredibly fast, is the Niagen Plus clinic network. These are the clinics offering the IV and injectable forms. That network has just exploded. It went from about 14 clinics in late 2024 to almost 600 by mid-2025. That's where the major growth is coming from right now. You saw in the Q1 numbers, Niagen ingredient sales, which includes those clinics, were up 95% year over year. Tru Niagen sales grew too, 24%, which is solid, but the clinic network is really the engine right now.
Nearly 600 clinics. That's impressive growth. And speaking of relationships, they have this big partnership with Nestle Health Science. How important is that?
It's very significant, yeah. Nestle Health Science isn't just a customer buying the Niagen ingredient for their own products through a supply and licensing deal. They've also invested directly in the company. They bought stock, held about 3.8 million shares as of the end of 2024. Now, why is that interesting? Well, Nestle has a history of doing this, investing in a company, getting to know it, and then acquiring it later. They did exactly that with Immune Therapeutics, bought them out at a big premium. So it makes Nestle look like the most logical potential acquirer for Niagen Bioscience down the road. And that existing relationship makes an acquisition much less risky for Nestle because they already know the business inside out.
We touched on the IP before, but let's just hammer it home. In this growing NAD+ market, what really protects Niagen Bioscience? What's their ultimate competitive advantage?
It really comes back to that intellectual property fortress. It's their main shield. Over 50 patents, especially those composition of matter patents on their specific NR forms. It creates a legal barrier that stops competitors from just making and selling the exact same thing that Niagen has spent years validating in clinical trials. Competitors have to use different molecules, maybe NMN, maybe other NR forms without the same data package. That IP is incredibly strong and probably their most durable advantage.
Let's circle back to the financials then. Given all this R&D, the clinical trials, how healthy does the company look on paper right now?
Well, based on their Q1 2025 results, pretty healthy, actually. Total sales hit $30.5 million, up 38% from the year before. Tru Niagen sales up 24%, but again, those Niagen ingredient sales, driven by the clinics, up a huge 95% to $8 million. Their gross margin improved quite a bit too, up to 63.4%, partly because that ingredient business is higher margin. And the bottom line was strong, $5.1 million in net income compared to a loss the year before. They generated $7.9 million in cash from operations, and they ended the quarter with $55.6 million in cash, and again, crucially, no debt. Based on that strong start, they actually raised their forecast for full-year revenue growth to 20-25%.
Solid numbers. But how do you actually value a company like this? It really feels like a battleground stock, doesn't it? Two different stories depending on how you look at it.
It absolutely is. You've got two very different ways to look at the valuation. The bear case looks at it like a traditional consumer goods company. Based on metrics like price to earnings, price to sales, it looks expensive. The argument is that the current stock price already assumes a lot of future growth, so there's not much margin for error if things don't go perfectly. But the bull case basically says, forget those traditional metrics. This isn't just a supplement company. You have to value it based on the potential of that clinical pipeline. And the potential there is massive. Think about the total addressable markets, the PAMs. Long COVID could be trillions. Parkinson's is huge, enhancing CAR-T therapy, right. Tens, hundreds of billions. If they hit it big in just one of those major areas, the current market cap, around $1 billion, could look incredibly cheap in hindsight. So you have this profitable base business providing a sort of safety net, a valuation floor, de-risking it to some extent. And then you have the clinical pipeline offering that huge asymmetric upside potential you normally only get with pure biotech plays. It's a really unique combination for investors to weigh up.
And it seems like the bigger institutional investors are starting to see that unique blend too.
Yeah, institutional ownership has been growing. You see names like BlackRock, Vanguard on the list. And another point is executive compensation. A big chunk of it, like 65% of their long-term pay, is tied to performance stock units. So management's incentives are pretty well aligned with creating long-term value for shareholders. It suggests they're focused on executing that long-term strategy.
Okay, so to wrap things up, Niagen Bioscience is really in this unique spot, isn't it? Trying to bridge stable consumer health cash flow with the high-stakes, high-reward world of biotech drug development, and that financial stability you highlighted, being profitable, having no debt, generating cash, it's a massive differentiator, gives them breathing room. Looking forward, what are the key things for people to watch? Well, definitely the NOPARK trial results for Parkinson's in early 2025. That feels like the biggest single catalyst on the horizon. Then any news on partnerships or licensing, especially around that CAR T-cell data, could be significant. Hopefully we finally get some clarity on the long COVID trial data too, just to resolve that uncertainty. And of course, any updates on their progress with the FDA for the rare disease programs like AT. But naturally, there are risks too. Clinical trials are inherently risky. NOPARK could fail, and that would be a big blow. There's valuation risk. If the pipeline doesn't pan out, the stock might get re-rated downwards towards a more typical consumer multiple. And, competition and potential regulatory hurdles are always going to be there.
Right. And maybe a final thought to leave listeners with. This deep dive really shows how a company can try to strategically blend two very different worlds, consumer wellness, drug development, to potentially create a less risky way to invest in biotech innovation. But it also brings up a bigger question for all of us, I think. In this age of rapid scientific progress, how do you, as an observer or potential investor, really figure out the true value of a company whose biggest potential might not be in today's earnings, but in the breakthroughs it hopes to deliver tomorrow? It's a tough question.